Hi there, I am Christy from the Mason Jar in Grand Rapids. Thank you for joining us on our how to make a chunky knit blanket tutorial, if you will. I'm with my mom. She's the one behind the phone / camera, so you'll probably hear her interjecting as we make sure that we don't forget any of the details on what we need to tell you guys in order to make your blanket successful. So a couple of great things. A lot of times we get asked, is this hard to make? Am I gonna be able to do this? Absolutely will. We're gonna walk through this step by step. We'll give you lots of tips and tricks to make sure that it's kind of a no fail. We always say we haven't had anybody that's walked away yet without a blanket being made. So we'll make sure that we give you all the information that you need, all the tools that you need, everything that you need is right in the bag that we've either mailed you or sent you home with. So each of you has the necessary number of skeins of yarn. Your blanket is going to be approximately 40 by 60. Here's a couple of great things about the blanket. Everyone's blanket is unique, but they will all turn out. If you follow our steps, I promise you won't walk away with a tablecloth or a table runner replacement instead of a chunky knit blanket. I do have one here behind me that we made just to kind of give you an idea of what it looks like. In your kit to start, you'll either find a paper tape measure or a length of string. You'll want to pull that out, and then you'll have a couple of white stickers in there as well, so you want to make sure you get those out when you get ready to get started. The blanket is very forgiving, so it doesn't have to be perfect. As you go along, you'll find that you're going to make loops per row. Those loops don't have to be identical. The blanket, by the time you get all these skeins tied together, it's very heavy, and so it kind of just shakes itself out. So if you get along some way and you're like, oh, this loop is bigger than that loop, don't worry about it. You really don't have to worry about it. It's super easy, like I said, to shake out, and it's not going to make any difference, so you don't have to worry about that. It is machine washable. We recommend a gentle cycle, no fabric softener. That is what generates the pilling of the fabric, so it is super duper soft. Like I said, it's heavy. You're gonna love it. It's gonna be great. So I am gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna ask my mom though if there's anything she can think of that I forgot. That's what I have to do every single time.
Not yet. We'll
Okay.
continue on.
Okay. So most likely your yarn is tucked into the end of this skein, so you just want to reach in there and pull it out. You just want one skein to start with. So any of the other skeins that you have, just set them aside. You don't need them until it's time to tie one on. Usually this isn't tucked in here this far, but this one's tucked in pretty good. It's giving me lots of yarn. That being said, when it comes to how much yarn you want out at a time, you want enough to work with, but not so much that you have all this extra yarn in your way, and not so little yarn that you're pulling this skein along as you're trying to do your blanket.
Also, in saying that, on occasion you'll come across a knot. It's a manufactured knot that's in there. It's perfectly fine. You probably won't ever see it in the blanket. Oh, good example. Right there's one. That's the norm. So just act like it's not even existing and just continue on.
Yep, just keep working right along. You don't want to undo this. Okay, so I have a tape measure out, which I don't need anymore, like I said. So I'm going to walk you through this first. The good news is there's like 3 transitions in this whole blanket, and that's it. And so the first 2 rows are probably the most difficult. Yeah, they're still not difficult. I say that, but it took me a couple times to get it the first time also. But we have given you your measurements here on this, either, like I said, whether you got a measuring tape, paper tape, or a piece of string. What you're going to do is you're going to take your 2 fingers like this. You're going to drape your yarn right over your fingers like this. Going to grab right a hold of it. I'll do this one twice just to make sure, but you're going to spin your fingers around 2 times, reach down and grab your long piece of yarn and pull right on through. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. Drape it over your fingers, and this is just going to tuck into your blanket, so this doesn't have to have some sort of significant length to it. It's just going to tuck back in when we get done with the blanket, so the length of this really doesn't matter. You just have to have enough to grab onto. Grab onto it, twist around 2 times, reach down, pull through, and create a slip knot. And we'll work on tightening it down in a minute, something else you don't have to worry about. Okay, so you want to have this loop be about big enough to fit your 3 fingers and your thumb. So you're putting your fingers through there. In order to make it smaller, you're just pulling this big, long lead, okay? Fingers in, Should fit your fingers in your thumb. If you need to tighten it down, pull the long lead. Need to make it bigger, just pull that loop. Put those fingers right in there. Now to tighten it down, just pull on it a little bit. It'll tighten down.
It's the one and only time throughout this whole blanket that you'll ever do that stitch.
Yep, so that's your slip knot. Okay, now you're gonna take that paper tape or that string, put it right in front of you, and then tape it right on down with the stickers that we've given you. Okay, like I said, this blanket is approximately 40 by 60 in its measurement. Those will vary based on how big or small your loops are. And this string is the 40 inches, so it's 40 inches, and then you're gonna work this blanket 60 inches the other way. I'm gonna have my mom kind of zoom in just a little bit so you can see this next stitch. I always take my skein and put it whatever direction I'm heading. So whatever direction I'm working, that is where my skein goes. So I'm gonna start going that way, so that's where my skein is gonna go. Everything you do with this blanket will be up off of the table. And by that I mean it's always gonna come up. That's how you work it.
Everything's from underneath.
Everything's from underneath. If you find yourself tucking your yarn through, it will give you a bump on top. It's called purling. You don't want to do that. It's up from underneath every single time. Okay. So this first one, in class, I like to joke that I'm not a knitter or a crocheter, so you're not going to find really any technical terms from me, which is why it's a basic knitting class or a basic hand knitting class. You are going to create like a chain stitch, and I say the best way to know that is it kind of looks like a pretzel. So again, lay your yarn straight down, take your fingers through, you're going to grab that yarn from underneath and you make a loop, and then you reach down and you make another loop, and you reach down and it's another loop. And this is just about, again, the width of your fingers. You're going to make approximately, you're going to run this just the distance of the measurement device we gave you, and then you're going to stop. These don't need to be big. You don't want this super tight. If you make it super tight, a couple of things. It makes your blanket smaller, it makes it harder to work your yarn, and it has the possibility of making your blanket really long and really skinny. And you don't really want to do that. So you just want to give it a good, like I said, run it about the length of your fingers.
And as you can see, as Christy does that, she's running her hand along it as it kind of keeps it down and causes it not to twist on her, because she's feeding her yarn through one hand, but yet she's holding down the braid with her other hand. So this is allowing her to let it lie flat on the surface that you're working on.
And here I am to that little bit of that knot in that yarn. I'm just going to pull it right on through like normal. Give myself a little bit more yarn, and I'm going to do a measurement, see where I'm at. I got just about 1 or 2 more loops. Okay, so there you have it. So you can see that I have a little bit like a pretzel or a chain stitch. You can see all my top loops here. So that's what that should look like. If you have some twists, that's okay. We're going to talk through that, but that's what that should look like right now, is that chain stitch. So then our next row. So once we make this transition for this next row, it's consistent for the remainder of the blanket. So you are almost through any of the changes that we're going to make. So you have this outside open loop. Everyone should have a loop that looks like this. This is what I'm going to call stitch 1. This stitch right here, we are going to skip this stitch. If I fed the yarn through that stitch, it would be continuous. It would just continue to pull out. So we're skipping that. You're going to go on to stitch number 2 right here, and you're going to feed your yarn. I'm going to move my skein right back the other way because now I'm heading this direction. It's through this top loop. You're just pulling a loop up and you lay it flat. Next top loop, you pull through and you lay it flat. This next top loop, you pull it through and you lay it flat. So you may have had a twist in there somewhere. I'm back to my knot, but if you had a twist or if you've gotten some spots that are tight, you don't have to feed every single one of them. You can skip an area. This yarn is so thick that it will fill in that gap. You don't have to worry about having a gap or a hole in your blanket, if you will.
On this row only.
On this row only, yeah. As you're because right now you're determining what loops you're creating. So you're just going to keep pulling through those top loops. And here is kind of the size of the loop where you'll decide how chunky you want this blanket to be. No matter how chunky these are, or how wide these are, you're still going to have consistency in your pattern, but it is a chunky knit blanket. You'll start to see a cable pattern, but it is a chunky blanket. So you keep I'm going to walk through this first row. This is where you want to make sure that you pull your yarn tight, which just means you don't have excess yarn hanging out back here. But that doesn't mean that you want these small. Like I said, the smaller these are, the easier they are to pull through, and the harder it is to work the blanket. You just want it to be big enough, I'd say 2-3 inches, that you can continue to work the blanket. It is nice if you have a helper that can unroll your yarn, but not too often is that the case. You can do this, and you can do this blanket however you want, whether you want to stand up at your counter, whether you want to sit down at your table, whether you want to sit down on the floor, whatever you're most comfortable with. I do recommend this, that you take a break once in a while, because it just can sometimes be a lot on your back. So just make sure you're taking some breaks and stretching and all that good stuff. So, okay. So this is the completion of our true row number 1. This next step is going to be critical. You are going to want to count all of the loops of your blanket. So this loop out here, you want to count this one. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24.
24 loops. And then when Christy says this is the critical part, this is where if you are consistently counting every row and you come up with the same number of loops every time, you will not have a hole in your blanket.
Right, and we'll walk you through what that looks like if you do, but it really is best. So the reason we gave you the white tabs is you want to write your number of loops on there, because you want to have that same number every single time, like my mom just said. So again, I double check. You want to count, absolutely count that outside loop, and then all the way to the end. So it's 24 loops that I have. Write it down.
People often ask us what's the correct number of loops, and there is no right number, but we can tell you that generally it's anywhere from 20, I would say really no more than 28. It's right in that ballpark for that perfect length on this. If you're past that and you're into the 30s, you've made it too long, and your blanket will be wider than it is long. So you need to take out a few of the loops.
It usually is because this is too tight and it's created too many of these loops is what that is. So if you wanted to, you could undo that and then just kind of give yourself a little bit of space. Or like I said, not go so tight in here. But hopefully you're right in that. Typically people are right in that ballpark. Like my mom said, no right or wrong. That's just the general ballpark of where you want to be with loops. Okay. So now what you're going to do is you're going to work your way back on down the blanket and do the exact same thing that you just did. You're just taking your long lead.
Once again, it's always from underneath and up and through.
And you're going to go through that loop you just created. So you finished it, you counted, you made sure you had the right number, and then you go again. So I'm just going to loop right on through. And some people take their skeins and put them on the chair, or put them next to them, or put them around their neck, and it's whatever you're most comfortable with, whatever you feel like is giving you the easiest way to work your blanket. And you will find that you work easier or better or faster, however you want to look at it, one way to the other. So sometimes you're quicker right to left or left to right. That's not unusual. Very quickly you will start to see a pattern as far as where you need to pull. I'm just going to give you an example here next. I'm going to make sure once again that's pulled up tight, And you just want to make sure that you don't have yarn, say for example like this. You don't want to have yarn hanging out here like this. You want to make sure that yarn is pulled up tight. Because what ultimately could happen is you could loop through that, but it's not really a loop. So you just want to make sure that you are looping through the loops that you've already created. And once you get rolling on it, you'll be amazed at how fun it is and how you can, yeah, it really is relaxing, therapeutic. The nice thing is once you learn it, and then you can do it again on your own. Okay, so now what I want to do, I want to make sure I count, and I have 24 loops. So most times we get asked, what do I do with that loop that was dangling out here? You grab it, you turn the corner. So you grab it and you pull it up just like you did all the other loops.
Because it was one of your loops in the original count.
So your number still stays the same. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. So, believe it or not, you do the exact same thing back. I'm going to go through a couple of rows with you. So, again, you finished it, you counted, you start over again. You loop right through that last loop you just created. You loop right on up. And for some reason, you may have a tendency, it's a natural tendency for whatever reason, to want to make this loop bigger when you finish the blanket, when you finish that row, and you don't need to. It needs to just be consistent with the same size as the other loops. If you make it a little bit bigger, it's fine. I'm just saying that it doesn't need to be any bigger. It's not doing anything different than any of the other loops are doing. Work your way right on back down your row. I'll finish this row, and then when I come back the next time, I'm going to show you what it looks like if you miss a loop and how you can fix it.
If during this process that you're making your blanket and enjoying every minute of it, I'm sure, and you are stumped by a certain situation you've gotten yourself in, please, by all means, do not hesitate. We're going to include our store number, and a cell phone number. If you're having a few people over to do a blanket party with a few of your friends, please, by all means, call us. We'll definitely walk you through the situation.
Yeah, we can FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it is to make sure that you are just feeling good about what you got going on, and double check in. A lot of people want us to take a look at it, or if you run into any issues, then we're more than happy to make sure that you end up with a blanket that you are very satisfied with. Okay, so
as you can start to see, the cabling that's going to start as she progresses through her skeins of yarn.
And I know that we keep saying it, but you really don't want to skip a row of not counting. You want to make sure you count every single time. Because if you count every row and you have one missing in that row, you can fix it immediately. If you skip a row or every couple of rows and you don't know whether or not you've missed something, it's a lot more work to go back. Sometimes you have to undo it to go back. So, you have to undo it to fix it. So you just want to count every single time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, so this row I'm going to intentionally skip one. And typically that is what happened. What I just did there is this: you get one that gets tucked under or left behind, and then and I don't recommend counting each loop. First of all, it's just not fun. You aren't doing a blanket to, I like to oftentimes joke, be loopy by the time you're done, because all you've done for an hour and a half to 2 hours is count loops. So it is perfectly acceptable to just count it at the end of each row. Don't feel like you have to count each time you make a loop, because that's all you really would be doing. Okay, so I'm finished.
She's gonna count her loops and find out that she's missed one.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So I know I am short one place. So oftentimes what we do is we kind of just couple up with where we see that that pattern or that cabling. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. And then we would see right here that this is dropped back and that this just needs to get pulled through. So the great thing is you do not have to undo a row. You just pull a little bit from the rows next to you. Like I said, remember, this is very forgiving. So when you get to the end, there you go.
And the only time this would be a problem is if you wove your blanket way too tight and you don't have any give in there. And that would happen if you did weave your blanket too tight.
It's pulled too
And a
tight.
lot of times what will happen is this will get tucked under.
So you
And it
just
looks
don't see it.
obvious here, but when you start to get several rows out, it's not as obvious. So that's why the critical thing, and we, at every class, we just cannot emphasize enough because we're all chatting and having a good time too. The situation is just take the time to count because we will guarantee you will not have a hole in your blanket if you count every row.
So sometimes what happens is instead of going down a row, or down a number, I'm sorry, you go up a number. And what that typically means is that you have somehow looped through a piece of excess yarn. Oftentimes that's much more difficult to spot than it is to spot a dropped stitch. So if you go up a number and you cannot find it within that last row, just continue to finish the blanket, but stay consistent. If your number was 24 and you find yourself that you've gone to 25, you must stay with 25. You cannot go back to 24. That means that you've dropped one. So you want to make sure you want to stay consistent throughout. That's the best way to ensure no drop stitches. If you find that you've picked up a stitch somehow, then stay consistent with that stitch. And it sounds silly, but you may always just want to double check your counting because so many times we, like my mom said, we get to chatting or, you know, we're just in a hurry or whatever the case may be, and you just are off in your count. A lot of times that's what it is. So count once, if you're off, count again, and then up one, double check, down one, you got to make sure you find that missed stitch.
And 9 times out of 10, if you have gained a stitch, it's like Christy previously said, this is loopy in there, and you're grabbing that as an extra stitch. So if you just do a little tug on both sides,
Make sure that's tight.
and you
don't
make
have
sure
that
it's
excess
tight, you
yarn.
won't have the excess yarn in there, that won't be a problem.
Okay, I'm going to walk through another row, and then I'm going to show you how to tie on from skein to skein. It really is a lot of fun, and like I said, it really is very relaxing. Once you get going, it's kind of like you're just moving right along, but you just want to make sure no matter how much you're moving right along, you don't forget to count those stitches. If the blanket starts to get a little bit far out in front of you, you can always fold it up. I'll show you that as well. Just saves on your back so you don't find yourself stretching so far. So you're not like this, and you can work with it a little bit closer to you. Some people like to feed their yarn, which looks more like this. And then they pull the whole loop through. Again, it's fine however you want to do it. You just want to make sure that you are pulling that tight behind. I personally just pick it out with my thumb and make sure that it's pulled tight because that way I can feel it come right up off that table. Everything again is up from underneath. Okay. So I'm going to count my stitches before I get onto anything else. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay, So now it's tying them together. You're just gonna tie it. Sometimes I do 2, sometimes I do 3. It just depends on how much yarn I've given myself here. But typically I just do 2. It's 1 and then another. The trick here is when you tighten, you do not tighten just like that. You do not tighten from the end.
That couldn't have happened at a more perfect time.
Yep, you got to make sure this yarn, when pulled on the ends like that, will shred. So you want to make sure that when you tighten it, that you tighten it from the inside long pieces of yarn. So you're going to tighten, and you're going to pull here. You're going to tighten down this way. And you're going to just pull it on tight. Now, I'm going to do that one more time just to show you. Before I even get there, you're probably thinking, what am I going to do with those, we call rabbit ears or tails? You're just going to tuck them into the blanket. So you don't have to worry about that. Once you'll see kind of where that knot falls, and you can either tuck it in, or we say after it naturally tightens down, you've used it a couple of times and it's been able to tighten itself down, then you can just cut those off. Usually you don't even notice it once you get into the blanket. So sorry, I just lost that again. You're just going to knot it. Do it one more time. Pull that out there, just tighten it a little bit, but you're tightening here. Just give it a little tug, tighten it. That's it, just like that. Like I said, you'll see here in a second where that's gonna fall.
And normally 9 times out of 10, if you have a drop stitch, a lot of times in this particular situation, it's right where that knot is.
Yeah, because it's just a little bit of an extra chunk of material, and you have a tendency to want to skip one of the loops that is around it. So this, you just created this loop, you counted, you go back through the last loop that you created every single time. So you're just going to go back through and you work your way right on back down that row. You're going to pull this through just like you did normal, just like that. You're going to keep on going. And when I say fold, you can fold it just like this and then pull it towards you.
So you're not stretching. Over.
And you don't want to let it drop down, because then it's gonna, like I said, it's gonna get very heavy, and you don't want it to pull off the table or the counter or whatever it is that you're working on. Anyone know what I'm going to do next? Count my stitches. Count my loops. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. And what I was saying earlier when I was saying that these didn't have to be perfect, they don't. You'll see that mine are not all the same size. Some are a little bit bigger, some are a little bit smaller. It all comes out in the wash.
And as you can definitely start to see, it's all starting to cable up so nicely.
And you can even see a little bit of a pattern on the back also. Okay, so I'm going to do one more row down just to show you how to work through this tie on, and then after that I'm going to show this is what you are going to do for the remainder of your skeins. First skein, tie on the second skein, so back and forth, side to side, through your loops, continue to count. You're going to do that until you get to the end of your last skein. So I'm going to work again this way just to show you, like I said, working through that knot. That knot is going to fall in a different spot for everybody. It could sometimes fall in the very end, the very last loop. It can fall right dead center in the middle. It's going to fall different every single time. A lot of times folks will say, if I wanted to do like a black blanket and I wanted to, change the colors out, if I wanted to do cream and gray or gray and dark gray or, any of the other colors, what does that look like? So you obviously would stop with your skein at the end and tie in at the end, so your block would be consistent, you know what I mean? So it wouldn't start out in the middle of a row, but that's the only time that you would really not run through the very end of a skein. Right here, you're just grabbing it and pulling right on up through. So now that really shouldn't be an issue again, because it's been worked both ways, and your loop that you're focusing on is, now it's a couple rows behind you where that knot is. Okay, so I'm gonna count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Okay. Should I go through closing off or not yet?
Sure, but when you get to the point where you're ready to be finishing up your last skein of yarn, your yarn's gonna, and you don't obviously want to go all the way to the end because you're gonna have to close it off. And I'm gonna show you here, this small pile, and you kind of can feel it and kind of get a feel for how much yarn it's gonna take you. By this time, you've known about how much yarn it's gonna take you to get back to finish it off. So, and if you don't have enough yarn, obviously you wouldn't be able to finish it to the end. So we want to make sure it's almost best to have a little extra as opposed to not having enough. So
a lot of times we say what it looks like here should be that you have enough to go down and come back, is about how much yarn you want to have just for that one last row.
Yes, just for the last row. So this even might be just a tad bit much, because Christy's got 24, so this is probably a little bit, that's probably about it. It's really truly just enough little squeeze. You can tell that you've used the majority of your last skein, but that's enough to get you back and forth.
Okay, so we are gonna, so like I said, you've done your first skein, tied on, you know, this is consistent throughout the whole blanket to the very end of your last skein. And then this is what this is gonna look like. You're gonna lay over, and then you pull up from underneath. This that you're pulling from your skein of yarn is what becomes your top loop. You lay over and you pull up from underneath. You create a loop, you lay over, you come up from underneath.
You notice how Christy's, when she pulls that, what I consider the new loop up through the bottom, you have to give it a little bit of a tug, because this is now the other end of your blanket, and you don't want this to be tight, because this is going to be the 40 inches that you just had on the beginning.
You'll
when
kind
you
of
first
see
started.
here, and I'm going to interject, but kind of see here, there's going to be consistency with how this row looks and how this row looks. So like my mom said, it'll be the top and the bottom.
So you can begin to see how that is, the finishing braid is on there.
Yeah. And also, so you want this like to finish it and to pull it tight, but if this is too much, say you make that too big like this, you can't fix that. So you just want it to be just enough to lay over the top and pull up from underneath. You don't want this super duper tight, and you don't want it super duper big. And you always want to pull from here, your extra yarn, you know, what you have remaining, as opposed to pulling from in here, because that's how you'll lose these loops. And it's critical before you do this last row to make sure that you've counted that last set of loops, because you don't want to get to the end of your blanket and you've had 24 loops all along, you don't count that last row, you close off and you have one open loop. I mean, it's a great place to do it, but you don't want to get all the way to the end and have that one last row not counted. So you just continue over, up from underneath. You lay over, up from underneath. Yes, I do literally say this every blanket, every time. Over, up from underneath. Lay it flat over, you come up from underneath. So it looks like you're doing two, and you are, but it's because you're creating a new loop here. Up, over, up, and 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 over, up, over, up, over, up, over, up, and over, up, over, up. Okay, so now you have this last loop, okay? So you're gonna take, I'm snapping that for the purpose of this, but this would technically be the end of your last skein. You're gonna put it right through here, you take it and you just cinch it right on down. Then you do it again. You take it to the blanket, you pull it through, you just cinch it right on down. You're gonna feel it, it's gonna tighten right on down. You do it a couple, 2-3 times, whatever you're most comfortable, depending on how long this is. Then you take this and you just weave it right back into your blanket. Just like that. So then you're gonna come back here. This was the very beginning stitch that we had, that very first knot. You're gonna do the exact same thing. You're gonna create a loop. You're just gonna knot it back to itself, back to the blanket. Pull through, tighten it right on down. I do the exact same thing again. Pull it through, just knot it right back to the blanket. And then you're gonna cinch it right on down. You take whatever is left and you just tuck it right on into your blanket. So you can either cut those off a little bit shorter, you can tuck them in, and then we're gonna flick over and show you. So this is where your ears were, but as you can see, it's kind of tucked itself right into the blanket. So you kind of see the pattern on the back, and then you most certainly see the pattern on the front. So this is your starting stitch, your closing row. Consistency and making sure that you absolutely count each time, each row. And that's it. It's super soft and fuzzy and cozy, and hopefully, and like I said, yours is obviously gonna be much bigger. This is more like a scarf, much bigger than this, and you'll shake it out and you'll see that it's wonderful, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you have any questions, there is a business card in the packet that we sent to you. Our information is on there, our email, cell phone number, and the number to the store. So do not hesitate to send us a picture, give us a call. Like we said, if you have a group that's getting together, we'd be more than happy to be involved. We thank you so much. We hope that you love your blanket, and take care.
Enjoy it for a lifetime.
Thanks.
Good night.